Hi, everybody. Welcome to Radiator Comics Studio. My name is Neil Brideau. My pronouns are he, him, his. I run Radiator Comics, which distributes self-published and small press comics, graphic novels, and zines. Thank you so much for joining us for today's event, Hands-On Advice, with Ezra Claytan Daniels, Breena Nuñez, and Mike Centeno. Radiator Comics Studio is a series of online programs and print publications designed to support and expand the cartooning community in South Florida and to connect it with the national comics scene. Radiator Comics Studio is made possible with support from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, and we're grateful for their support. We are broadcasting today from Miccosukee land. The people from whom the land was stolen are still here and still caring for this place. It's also important to recognize and acknowledge the history of African-American, Bahamian, Haitian, and other Caribbean people whose labor made South Florida what it is today. We all have a lifelong responsibility to be better neighbors to the people and places where we're located and to work to dismantle white supremacy. Expressing one's ideas and feelings through comics and zines can be really powerful. And one of our hopes with programming like today's is to make those tools of expression more accessible. So we're grateful to have you all here today, and so thrilled to have three fantastic cartoonists and incredibly thoughtful individuals here to answer questions about making comics. Ezra Claytan Daniels, Breena Nuñez, and Mike Centeno have all worn many different hats in the cartooning and small press communities, including cartoonist, writer, publisher, illustrator, organizer, educator, filmmaker, musician. I'm sure I'm missing some roles that they've played. Ezra Claytan Daniels is a multidisciplinary artist and creator of the Eisner, Harvey, and Ignatz Award nominated graphic novels. Sorry, I'm sharing the screen while I'm trying to talk. Let me try that again. Ezra Claytan Daniels is a multidisciplinary artist and creator of the Eisner, Harvey, and Ignatz Award nominated graphic novels Upgrade Soul and Bottom Feeders. Ezra's work has been featured on the Criterion Channel and is in the permanent collection of the Whitney Museum. Ezra resides in Los Angeles, California, where he writes for film and television, most recently the upcoming third season of Doom Patrol for HBO Max. So welcome, Ezra. Our second panelist is Breena Nuñez. Breena is an educator and cartoonist from the Bay Area and is the co-founder of the newly launched small press called Laneha House. She creates both journalism and memoir comics that discuss the intersectionalities of Blackness, queerness, and being of Central American descent while being from the US. You can find Breena's comics in anthologies such as Tales from La Vida, Drawing Power, Women's Stories of Sexual Violence, Harassment, and Survival, and Be Gay, Do Comics. So welcome, Breena. And then finally, our third panelist is Mike Centeno. Mike was born in Caracas, Venezuela, and has been living in the US since 2010. His work has been featured in The Nib, Chicago Reader, Netflix's Easy, and the Colombian newspaper El Espectador. His comics tend to focus on the constructs of identity, immigration, and the search for objective truths in an inevitably subjective world. So welcome to all three of you. I'm so excited to have you here. And now is a good time if y'all want to if the panelists want to turn their microphones on, that would be awesome. And so the way that this works is audience members submitted questions when they registered for this event. So I'll be asking most of the questions today, and we're just going to jump in. So the first question is from Sydney, who asks, what is some advice you would give a younger version of yourself about making comics?
I can start.
Here we go.
Well, this isn't really a comics related advice that I would give my younger self, but I have been thinking a lot about just like life advice I would give my younger self. And that is to not be so afraid to dance. Because I think like being that like kid who thought like it was cooler to not dance than to dance, like cost me so many like great fun opportunities, not only just like socially, but just like in the comics world, because like going to comic shows, like there's always dance parties afterward, and I was just like, I'm too scared to dance, I don't want to go there, I'm not going to go, and like I would just like end up missing out on so much. But I think it's somewhat relevant to comics because so much of like indie comics is about the community, and I think like, and it's about breaking down barriers, and I think like it's obviously it's totally natural to feel like insecure and self-conscious about some things, but I think the great thing about comics is that like everybody feels that way and everybody's scared. And I think like once you realize that, I wish I'd realized that earlier in making comics, that like everybody was scared, and it would have allowed me to like open up faster and be myself and like, you know, make faster like gains in terms of like becoming a better cartoonist. But I think like the professional advice I would give to people is to start small. I think that's like pretty standard advice that you'll hear from cartoonists, but I think it's really common for people just starting out with comics, especially if they're like, you know, like 20, 21, or like just out of high school. Like everybody in high school who's a creative has this like dream project that they want to do. That's like their epic, like their fantasy epic that they've spent like all 4 years of high school, like doing maps and like writing out the potions, and like they got this whole world figured out. And if your first project is like turning this into a 500-page graphic novel, it's gonna stall you out for so long because it's too daunting for like for a first time comics creator to start out with something like that. But I think the main thing is that like in the first few years of making comics, you're going to get so much better so fast that if you start with a 300-page book, by the time you get to page 30, you're going to be looking at the first 10 pages and be like, that's absolute trash. And by the time you get to page 100, you're going to look at the first 30 pages and be like, now I have to redo all of that stuff because I've gotten so much better. So I think it's just much better to start with like my first comic was 8 pages. My second one was 12 pages. My third one was like 20 pages. And then I did my 200-page book, but like I had to start small.
Yeah, I mean, I can really, the dance thing is really I cannot agree with that more. As someone, I do love to dance, and if anything, I feel like I don't dance enough these days. I want to dance, because I think the thing that's so beautiful about that is that my advice was going to be like, I spend so much time, like you said, trying to meet this weird standard that in a way just limited me, or like for me comics wasn't a thing I thought even was viable growing up. I come from a very like conservative as far as like professional like family, like doctors and stuff, and so I comics to me were like a pipe dream. It's impossible. And then the more like you enter this community, you meet more people, like you said, you realize everyone's just kind of flying by the seat of their pants, and it's only you who's setting those boundaries for yourself. So yeah, I think that idea of not looking bad, or like, oh, this doesn't look the way I want it to. Like, I wish I could just tell my younger self to be like, just shut up and do it. And like you said, once you do one, you'll start to get into this rhythm, and you start to get better and feel more comfortable, and you will if you do that meet that standard, but you have to let go of that idea that it's going to happen like at once, or like it's always going to be perfect. And sometimes you have to look a fool dancing even if you don't know how to dance, like, but it's fun to do it. So yeah, I think I couldn't have said it better. That's great.
Yeah, I really love that, Ezra. Like that's such a beautiful like like message to give to your younger self. Um I guess, you know, sort of echoing that. Um and also another thing I would want to add to um to the conversation that I'm currently trying to give to my younger self is that you have inherent value. Um, your story, whatever that story is, whatever you want to tell, like it's going to be valuable no matter like um, how little you think of yourself. Like I already was super like self-conscious and like very self-deprecating as a kid, who struggled with language a lot of the times until like I was 4. And even when I started speaking, it was garbled English. And I sort of made up my own language to kind of try to communicate what I was feeling. But I used to want to like create a story about just being like a kid growing up in South San Francisco. Like it's not anything close to San Francisco, but I've always wanted to just tell a story about home. And I was already thinking like, damn, like, well, it's not that like pretty or like majestic as like the city of San Francisco, but why was I so hard on myself already, like in 2nd grade, like wanting to share like these quiet moments I wanted to express through art and writing. And yeah, there was like a lot of years of like me feeling like nobody wants to have like a story in their hand about like just some random like no name town. But as I've been getting older, I've been really just like falling in love with like all these different places that really make up who I am as a person. And I feel like that's also why I gravitate to a lot of memoir and like autobio stuff. Like everybody has this beautiful like lens that I get to experience about what home looks like to them. So I would just say to that younger person and to anybody of like any age, like you have like this inherent value that you're adding to like this tradition and this culture of storytelling and comics.
That was great. Thank you. So we have a set of questions that are going to be about process. So the first question is from Kara, who asks, in what ways do you organize your ideas for comics? Sketchbooks, note cards, or is it more of an organic process?
I just want to jump in just because I think my process is maybe not the best, but to that point, I just want to say that it's you have to find your own, right? I feel like the way I do things, I do take notes in sketchbooks, but I don't really have like a system on how to like catalog them. I just like jot down ideas and like maybe a little drawing or so, and then I would recommend, as someone who doesn't do it that often, but I would recommend just having somewhere to write your ideas down. Have it somewhere, if it's your cell phone, if it's a sketchbook, if it's Post-its, like, and having a routine of checking them, not every day or anything, but just having like a little pile build up, and then making yourself go through it every once in a while, if it's once a week, once a month. Because sometimes I feel a lot of people struggle with like being blocked, writer's block, or not coming up with ideas, not feeling creative. And a lot of the times, to echo what Breena was saying earlier, the thing I have to learn to say to my younger self too is just like, be gentle on yourself. Like you do, like, just because you don't have the idea right now in this moment doesn't mean you're like, oh, you suck, like there's nothing in there ever. When in reality, if you go back to that pile, you'll be like, oh wow, I have this insane amazing idea about like an alien time traveling like dream lord or whatever, and like you might have just forgotten it, or it might just not be there that moment. But it's a weird way of trusting yourself and having a conversation with yourself. As far as making comics, as far as like developing those ideas, I do think like, and again, I'm not the best all the time, but I do think it helps, like once you find the idea again, then trying to take more organized notes, if it's like an outline, if it's like even just breaking stuff into beats, or like you don't have to come up with the whole story right then and there, but just knowing, like I've done a lot of organic pieces where I just like plop down and start writing, like, and whatever comes, and that works sometimes. But like I said, some days that won't be the case, and you will want to have that little like, oh yeah, this is where the middle is, or this is how it ends. The Dream Lord defeats the whatever Yeti man, and you know that, and so now you just have to make the plan to get from A to B. But yeah, I think having a place where you keep your ideas in whatever way you do it, I think that's very important for my process, at least.
Yeah, I'm the same, and I think I agree with Mike that like you should just go with whatever works for you, because everybody's going to have a totally different process. For me, I use Google Docs because I can access it on my phone or my iPad or my computer or like whatever I have in front of me. So like, and no matter where I am, like if I'm on a bus or something and I have an idea for a story, I can like open up Google Docs and go to the actual file that has like the story title on it and put everything in the same place so I can find it all. Because I think my big problem is just like finding stuff, because I'm like constantly writing down notes, and I used to keep stuff in my sketchbook, and I would never even remember that I wrote stuff in my sketchbook. And then I would like be looking through my sketchbook 2 years later after the book had already come out and be like, oh God, there's like this great line that I wrote in the sketchbook and I totally forgot about. So yeah, I think just like having it accessible and easy. And I think like just like lowering the barriers of like between you and like recording your ideas is crucial, just like to make it really informal. For me, I really gravitated toward digital art making and digital note taking because it was less precious, and that like lowered a barrier of entry for me. Like drawing on a piece of like really nice Bristol with like a really nice like nib pen or whatever, like that was like really gave me anxiety, because I was like, what if it's like bleeds or like messes up the paper in some way, and I just like wasted $1 on this piece of paper, and I have to like, it's like it's too stressful for me. So like having that, like just going straight to digital, if I mess up I just hit undo, it's like it just makes it a lot easier for me.
I feel like for me it's a little combination of like what both of y'all said. It's definitely organic and serendipitous. Like if an idea comes to mind, like it'll just like be jotted down either in a sketchbook or now in an iPad through the Notes app. And yeah, I used to do the sketchbook thing too, but I've accumulated like hella sketchbooks. And I mean, I love that. I love that I can go back and revisit an idea that needed just to like chill out for a little bit and marinate. Sometimes like walking away from an idea is necessary, just to not put so much pressure on myself. But yeah, it'll just sit there sort of collecting dust for like X amount of months to years. But I'm really like happy and privileged to now have like an iPad where I can just jot down an idea for like a gag comic, and now it just feels like visually for me, I like to just have something a bit more organized and easier to access because of like digital note taking. And I don't know, Google Docs just makes everything so much more easier than me just sifting through and trying to like sticky note everything, because my process is hella messy when it comes to doing everything with like traditional note taking.
Yeah, I would also like second what you were saying about like time. I think for me, time is a huge part of my process. Like I need to let something marinate for years just to like, for me to know that it's still something that I'm interested in. Like we all come up with like great ideas on the spot and be like, oh, wouldn't it be great if there's like an alien who spoke in farts? You're like, this is going to be the greatest comic ever, but like you have to sleep on it. And like when you wake up in the morning, like that wasn't such a good idea. But for me, it's like, I have to give it years. And like, if I keep thinking about an idea, like, man, I remember that thing I came up with like a year ago, like I should do something with that, because it still sticks with me. Like that's how I know when an idea is like good enough, or not good enough, but like interesting enough for me to spend the time it takes to like turn that into something real.
Yeah, and again, so I do think like to echo two things there. Like yeah, notes, like even just the note like app on my phone, I that really has been a game changer for me, because even though it's not, even if it isn't like the clearest thing, it's something you can quickly do if you're like on the train or like walking around. You don't have paper. I have like a little ideas. It's just called like an ideas folder, and it's nonsense most of the time, but like it definitely is like good to have that. But yeah, I think something I just what you just said, that I have ideas in my head that I'm still marinating for 3 years, and I will get to them. But I think it's like, even with like, I assume like with writers or writers' rooms, like nothing just comes out perfect. You know, things have to be ironed out. You sometimes miss things yourself, and you have blind spots about stories sometimes that you need to like unlock in a certain time. So I think, yeah, I think digital note taking, I just wanted to reiterate, I recommend it heartily.
And also I want to add too, on top of that, like to like, don't be afraid to inconvenience yourself to take the note, to remember something, because like think about like how many great ideas you've had just before you've fallen asleep. You're like, oh, I'll remember it in the morning. You'll never remember that.
Never.
Like, even if it's annoying to get up and find your notebook or find your phone, like you have to like take that effort to make the note, because otherwise it's going to be gone forever.
That is 100%. Yeah,
It's
true.
sometimes,
Get up,
like,
get up and do it.
like insomnia too. Like, okay, this thing is like not leaving me. It's keeping me awake. Like I have to just get myself out of bed and just like haphazardly write something down.
Yeah, trust yourself. Trust that story voice.
Well, and it sounds like that both like the write it down when you have the idea and the idea of like letting it marinate, like kind of like suggest the idea that like the ideas are like serving you rather than you being like you know, like serving the ideas.
Yeah.
Great. So moving on to writing, Lana asks, how do you do a script? Do you have to draw it out first in order to get the sequence more accurate? How do you organize your writing plan?
I mean, obviously, I feel like Ezra has a more maybe professional take on this side, but I've done a lot of different. I feel like I've worked different ways in different occasions, especially starting out. I feel like I didn't plan anything. I just sort of went in like kind of crazy. I find, like I said, writing things, it's like breaking things down from big chunks to little chunks. Even if you don't like write a full script, I think that really helps. Like I said, if you have like, the story is, you know, dog leaves the house, dog runs into a baby, they become best friends, they have a fight, they break up, and then they get back together. Like those are your 6 beats, and then you can go into each one and sort of like just massage them into like more thing. It's like dough, you know, just like spreading it out. And so by the end, even if you don't have like a full like script, like sort of film or movie script or a comic script that has like everything perfectly dialogued or everything, at least you know like where all the beats are, where everything is that you need to hit. And for me especially, it helps like to visualize the scenes as well. Like even if I don't know exactly what each person's going to say exactly like verbatim, but I know that they're going to have a conversation in this panel, or they're going to say a thing to each other here, or so like I think that's what I found. The more I do like mini comics and stuff, the more that process has become more streamlined for me. Like even like just know where you're going from the beginning. I think that's the most helpful thing for me, at least.
Yeah, that's the huge thing for me. And I feel like that was like, I really struggled with my first couple of stories, because I did kind of, you know, I just had like have an idea that I thought was cool for a story, and I would just start writing it, but I didn't really know what the story was actually about. And for me, that like knowing where you're going is all about like knowing what the underlying like thematic intent of the story is. And that sounds like it sounds really like daunting and incomprehensible. Like at least to me, like I didn't really understand what theme was until like my mid-20s. But once it clicked for me, it just made everything so much easier, because it's just like a North Star to the stories that you're trying to tell. And there's a specific book that unlocked it for me. It's called The Art of Dramatic Writing by Lajos Egri. It's like a kind of a classic, it's like a generic-ish screenwriting book, but like the way he breaks down theme and how to like suss out the theme of your story just like really opened my eyes, and it totally made everything so much easier, because that theme is just like, it's a like no matter how lost you get in telling your story, it's this thing you can always point to. So like for instance, I'm just trying to think of, as Mike was talking, I was listening to what you're saying, Mike, but I was also trying to think of like what's an example of like how theme can guide you. And like, so like say you're writing a story and like the theme is like, it's a critique of capitalism, and like you've told this whole story, and like at the end of the story, the protagonist and the antagonist finally face off, and you're just like, I can't figure out how like what's the protagonist going to do to defeat this antagonist. Like maybe he gets run over by a car, maybe he feeds him to a shark, like I don't know what to do. But then if you have that North Star of like, oh, this is a critique of capitalism, then it makes sense for the antagonist to get buried in coins or something, like, and just like making little decisions like that, it just makes every single choice so much easier, because as a storyteller, like the world is literally anything is possible. Like you can go in any direction you want, and it can be really daunting and really scary when you have that kind of freedom. And just like having that theme just kind of puts you in like a trench, so you don't veer off too far. And I think like for me, having a theme is like, that's where I start with my stories, because I feel like the reason I tell stories is to like communicate my political ideals. It's not like to, I don't really enjoy writing stories just like for fun, or like, this is just me. I'm not like trying to give people a good time, or like I'm not really too into escapism. I'm trying to indoctrinate people with my political ideals. Like, how do I do that in the easiest and clearest way? So I always start with like, what's the thing I'm trying to teach people or provoke people about specifically, and then build a story around that.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna be super helpful with this this question, because my process is pretty messy. Because I mostly have done like shorter form or shorter stories and comic strips. I definitely rely on thumbnailing as my form of writing. And for a while I thought this is kind of like breaking the rules, or I can't find any other way to like just traditionally script. I've tried that like while I was studying at CCA for my master's thesis, which was a memoir comic. But as I'm revisiting that project, I realize, okay, like I kind of enjoy the process of thumbnailing, and something that made me feel hella validated for just thumbnailing, or I guess storyboarding certain scenes that I want to depict, was just rewatching like a Hayao Miyazaki documentary and getting to understand the animation process. Like, oh, he has to storyboard certain scenes before like this gets into production. And yeah, for me personally, I just enjoy the thumbnailing process because it forces me to like be really quick and to not be so precious with the art and with the story itself, because I feel like I have to be open to change and self-editing too. But I don't know, there's just something electric about just getting quick like gesture drawings, or just even like feeling the emotion through like these poorly drawn like mushroom characters in these scenes. There's just something I wish I could transfer, like that, like this really like somber mood into like the final pencils or inks that I wasn't able to get from like the thumbnails. Like, yeah, I guess what works for me personally is just drawing as another form of writing.
Nice. So our next question is from Do Young, who asks, at what point in the process of creating longer comics have you found feedback useful or not useful? For example, at the very beginning, when it's just an idea, after a completed thumbnail of the story, after a script is written, and Do Young also includes a thank you to the panelists.
I think for me, I try to respect the time of other people. I try to respect other people's time. So like, I won't ask for feedback on something until it's like at a somewhat finished stage. But I think like a finished script is finished enough for me. Like my girlfriend is always my first reader for stuff, but like I'm not going to sit here and like ask her to read something that's like, you know, like temp dialogue or like temp descriptions or whatever. Like I'll finish it and then have her read the draft and then make changes on that. And then did I freeze? Am I okay? Okay, cool. But yeah, so that's the main thing. And I think like as I've gotten older too, like when I was younger, I used to be like so proud of anything I'd finished. Like when I finished the first draft of the script for Upgrade Soul, I was like, I'm so proud of this thing. Like, and I would like ask everybody I knew, like, would you read this thing? Like, it just like give me feedback and let me know what you think. And like, I think I've realized as I've gotten older that was like not a good use of anybody's time. Because it's just like such a big ask to have someone read a script that's for like a 300-page graphic novel and then like take the time to give you notes on it and like have a discussion about it. It's just a huge ask. So now I'm privileged enough to have like a little bit of extra income. So now when I ask people to read stuff, I'll usually offer to pay them for their time. And I think, and I'm trying to be like really strict about not asking anybody to do free work for me now, especially because I've been on the other side of that so much. So, and I think by putting like a monetary value on that in a weird capitalistic way, it makes me be a little bit more intentional with the stuff that I share to people. So like, I'm going to make sure that this thing is like actually in a really good, like semi-finished state before I send it off to you, because I know I'm paying you for feedback. So like, I want to make sure that I'm getting the most for my money, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a balance to find there. And just like before with the note taking and stuff, you have to find something that works for you as well. Because I think I sometimes I miss like art school of being like, oh, we get crits all the time. And that there's something very enriching about that having other people look at your stuff and having that conversation. But then there is a point where like you have to also, like I said, have a certain trust with yourself. That I agree. I don't think it's good or productive for if you're like, say every chapter you write, then you're gonna have someone give their opinion, because then the process start to get like slowed down a little bit. It's like you're not, like you said, it's not really useful if the story's at a stage where you should be getting this critique. So like there is this level of like, well, trusting yourself to a point, and then yeah, like I said, when like listening to your voice, like for me sometimes I've asked people that are in this chat right now to look at some ideas once I get to like the almost to the not full finish, but like to the 80%, 90%. If I have some doubts about stuff, I think it's helpful. But then it's also there. That trust in yourself still has to be there, because then I think something Ezra touched before, which I thought was very useful as far as writing, this like thinking about themes and what it is you're trying to convey with your stories, whether it's autobio or it's fiction or whatever. You need to know what that is. So then I think that's when critiques are really handy, because then it's like, if you give this to someone and their takeaway is completely not what you wanted, if they didn't get those themes, then maybe you can go back and rework it. But if you start showing things that are halfway through where they're like half baked, then you're risking that your vision or those themes to be sort of messed within the baking process. So yeah, I think it's important to just find a balance. I think getting outsider eyes before you finish your projects can be very useful, but in the end, you still have to have that trust in what you think is what you want to convey. I think.
Yeah, I'm pretty like imbalanced when it comes to figuring out that piece, when to share my stories, especially for like a long form project, because I can only speak to like sharing and receiving feedback for like comic strips. But I'm just here like also taking like some notes from like both of y'all. Like I think y'all present like really dope ideas that I personally need to take into account. So I'm still trying to find my balance, like between trusting myself and like how much time and how much space do I want to give to like all these other voices who want to share their feedback with me. Yeah, still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I think also, yeah, I just want to like reiterate what Mike said too. I think it's like you have to find such a balance between like sharing something that you feel like communicates your intent clearly enough for someone to actually give feedback on it, but not have it be too finalized that any feedback that requires revisions is going to be like a crazy amount of work, which I've done before, like showing someone like a pretty much finished graphic novel and they're like, I don't know if this third act works. I'm just like, well, I don't know what to tell you because it's done. So
yeah. But also that's also a good point. I think also what your intent is with that critique. Sometimes that's part of that trust as well. I think when, let's say, I have this almost finished piece, but I'm not so sure if it's the theme's getting conveyed properly, if my ideas are getting conveyed properly, and I'm gonna bring that to a friend or a couple of friends and say, hey, could you read this? But know what you want from that critique. Like if you're not asking for critiques on the artwork or the dialogue, all I want to know is if you get the idea, then remember that, because people are always want to give you notes on other stuff, but you have to know what it is you're looking from those critiques as well, because then you start taking every single note, it gets you know, like, again, it goes back to trusting yourself, knowing what you want out of critiques, and building sort of that thick skin too of like, well, like you said, if you don't like the dialogue, that's cool. I didn't ask you about that. Dialogue's the same. I just wanted to know if this was, you know, like, know what you want out of when you ask for feedback.
Yeah. Breena, just like you, I am taking many notes here. This is really great. And, you know, and I also think that it's like, no matter like where we are in our careers, like that, like, you know, like we're constantly learning how to do what we do in better ways.
Yeah.
So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about some personal questions. Yaramir asks, how have you maintained creativity in the face of loss, grief, and or despair? Which seems like a very good question to ask during the times that we're living in right now. I don't know if anybody wants to field that.
Sorry, I feel like I keep jumping in first, but I'm scared of silence. I think that's a really tricky question, because I think it depends. I think the first thing I want to say, like I said earlier, is always trying to remember to be gentle to yourself and listen to, like, not, sometimes I think we put a lot of pressure, especially creative people. I think sometimes in this social media world where you're like looking at everyone, like everyone's output and everyone's like thing, and you feel like, oh, I'm not doing enough, or I'm not putting out enough, which I think is not, it's, I don't know, I feel like that can be harmful to fall down that hole. I think comics and storytelling and art for me have always been a very useful tool to deal with grief and loss. I feel like a lot of the work I've done actually deals with that, because I find that in those moments, it's very like, I feel like as human beings we have this tendency to dwell on, or like to recall things, and like if you're sad, all of a sudden you start thinking about all the sad things that have ever happened to you, and you're like going through the Rolodex of like, I remember this time when this was sad, and like, and you can really build this like terrible, obviously not willingly, sometimes it just happens. But with comics, I find that, yeah, for me, they've sometimes been a weird way of channeling that grief and that loss into like nicer stories, maybe like that. I've written stories about like the deaths of family members that were very hard for me. Like, but in revisiting the story, there's this there can be some catharsis, but I don't want to say that as like, I don't want it to become as like you're milking your grief or your loss or anything. I think don't think of it as I think separating like the comic, like the product or the content from the art making, I think is important to do. I think sometimes we think of things as like we have to do this to show it, or to but sometimes just sitting with stuff and allowing yourself to like have those emotions come out onto the page, on your writing or your drawing, your thumbnails. And just like with the notes we were talking earlier, just letting them live there, you know, like letting them sit there for a little bit, and you might not want to revisit them, you might want to, but just don't, the last thing you should do is put any pressure on yourself to like, oh, if you are dealing grief or loss, or don't force yourself to do something that doesn't feel natural, I guess. But I do believe there's a lot of power in how you can channel that stuff for yourself, not for an audience or anything. But I think, yeah, I think my main note is just be gentle, and remember that you're going through some, like if you are going through tough times, you're allowed, and you're allowed to feel bad, and you're allowed to be sad. But I do believe that beauty can be found in those moments as well.
Yeah. Like it's sort of like this interesting relationship we have to like comics, or at least for me personally, like not only seeing this as like as this being like one of my identifiers for how I explain and introduce myself to people when it comes to career. Like, who am I as like this working like class person? I'm like a cartoonist, but I also will use like, you know, this talent I have for drawing and for writing to make these like diary comics that I don't always share with people. Like, I'll share some like every now and then when I feel like um it feels like safe enough for me to do that. But there's still like a lot of ideas that I just had to like draw for myself as another form of therapy. And yeah, I definitely felt like just compounded, like just sadness, like in different forms, especially with last year, from it being like very much like experiencing the violence via anti-Blackness and the violence, you know, that we see in land and how we have that relationship or lack of relationship to land with like all of the California West Coast fires. Like, oof, like couldn't help but just draw out like just silent panels about what it's like to just feel and sit with that grief. And sometimes like not drawing also helps too, like finding a different outlet. For me, it's been music. I play like this wooden flute that I really am really grateful for, because before I even wanted to be a cartoonist, I wanted to be a musician for a long time. And these times have kind of also helped me rekindle like this other form of medicine that was kind of vital to like my survival too. But yeah, finding space even from like drawing, I think is really necessary. And um, getting lost in other things like reading or just like watching, if you have to do this for yourself. Like, I know this was sort of helpful for me, like trashy reality TV. It's also been just like a nice way just to like find an outlet for for myself in another form of like just, I don't know, terrible television, just like mind numbing stuff where I don't have to like have like that political hat on all the time.
Yeah, I this is such a difficult and heavy question, and I don't really know how to answer it, but I think Breena and Mike both had really good answers. I think the main takeaway I would take from what they said is just that you should, like, you can't be too hard on yourself, and like just give yourself the space to not put pressure on yourself to be productive when you're not feeling it. And I think that's like, you know, it's something that's compounded by factors that even go beyond the terrifying and horrific events of this year, but just in general, like it's really hard to do good creative work when you're not feeling it. And I've learned as a creative person that like if I'm not feeling creative, I can't force it, because any work I do when I'm not feeling creative, I'm just gonna have to redo anyways. And I feel like recognizing when I hit that wall has been crucial to me. Like when I hit a wall now, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to sit here in front of my computer for 8 hours expecting this wall to crumble on its own. I need to go out, go for a hike, get some exercise, get some fresh air, listen to some music, play music or whatever, and mix it up. And I think that's been a good way to maintain creative energy. I think I felt a lot of guilt during the pandemic, because the way I cope with stress and existential anxiety is by burying myself in work. So this year has been like the most productive time of my life. I've gotten so much done. And just to give everybody like a glimpse of like, it's like a grass is always greener thing. Like if you spent this pandemic feeling like, why can't I work? Like I see everybody posting on Instagram that they're finishing all these projects and I just don't feel like I have any motivation to do anything. Let me tell you what it's like on the other side. Someone who's like getting work done, a crazy amount of work done, like it's not healthy. Like this is like an unhealthy coping mechanism for the terror and anxiety that I feel about everything that's going on in my life. And there's like, I'm not dealing with the shit I need to be dealing with. And there's going to be like another shoe that drops on the back end of this thing when I'm going to have a nervous breakdown because like I'm not engaging with the terror around me. So I feel like if you're a person who's lucky enough to have the mental capacity to engage with the things that are going on around you, then embrace that and like don't worry about making comics or being productive. Like we're living through terror right now, and if you can like acknowledge that, that's a gift greater than productivity, which is just like a capitalist ideal anyways. So just like live your life and embrace it.
Maybe dance a little.
Yeah, dance. Learn how to dance.
Yeah. Or just go nuts and dance, you know, the weirdest way. Just let yourself go crazy.
I regret not dancing enough during this whole pandemic.
I do recommend, sometimes I will just, you know, just in the kitchen, just like put some jams and just let myself go. It's not the same as dancing with other people, but it still gets some of those juices flowing.
Nice. So Nar asks, I have fibromyalgia, which gives me very limited amounts of time to use my hands, so I can't afford to do warm-up activities before losing hand strength. I'm afraid my skills will never improve enough at this rate to get any of my comics published. Do you have any guidance or recommendations?
I think something Breena said that is key is I think we were talking about story earlier and saying, you know, your stories are valuable, the things you have to say are valuable. I think, and this comes from someone who I think I'm very harsh on myself, or I have been, and my advice to my kid would be just like, chill out, man, like you're doing fine. Like, I feel like there's this standard of like draftsmanship that I'm never gonna achieve. Like that's like, oh, I'm never gonna be good enough. Like, and really, if you really look at around at all, like throughout the world, art history, like there is no, I don't think there's like a standard of what is like beautiful or worthy of or whatever. So I think, and I'm sorry, I feel like I keep repeating myself with all these questions, but just like allow yourself to be if you can only do a certain amount of time, then do that. As long as you're enjoying yourself doing it, just do it. And I think that'll shine through if you're just doing what you want to do or you'd love to do. I don't know. I don't know if it sounds too corny or whatever, but I think I believe that it will shine through. I think if you look through go to a library and you'll see so many different types of art styles these days that I don't think there's don't put a box on yourself to think that you're never going to achieve this level of thing. Just trust that you have something to say and a way to say it, and those two things are valuable, regardless of what you're comparing yourself to. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that. Go ahead, Breena.
Oh no, you can go, Ezra.
Well, I was going to say really quickly that like draftsmanship is such an unimportant part of making comics. Like some of the all-time best, most beloved, and most successful comics are not quote unquote drawn well. Like they're just like, as long as you can communicate your ideas. Sorry, I'm like, that was a Freudian slip. As long as you can communicate your ideas visually, I feel like that's the most important thing. So it could just be like the most minimalistic thing that you could imagine, as long as you're communicating clearly. And I just want to add really quickly too that I think another thing that I'm not warn against is maybe a strong term, but like this idea that like getting published is like the end game for making comics. I think it's healthier to just disavow that, because you can be a very successful and very influential and beloved cartoonist without ever being published. I didn't publish my first book until I was 38, after spending 20 years making comics and trying to break in. And during that 20 years, I made the best friends of my life and had the most amazing time doing stuff. And people respected me because I was doing stuff and putting it out on my own. And I was reaching people, which is the most important thing. So like, just because you don't get vetted by some like gatekeeping institution who like doesn't see dollar signs in the stuff you're doing, doesn't mean that the stuff you're doing isn't valuable.
100%.
Oh my God, I went in through like this like mini like existential crisis about not being published, and just remembering like, wait, like this is why my husband and I also wanted to create our own small press, so we can just do things at our own pace, make a story that, you know, might not make sense in like a mainstream lens, but just doing something for the pure love and joy of making mini comics and zines, about whatever we want. Um, and I guess sort of touching on like experiencing physical pain, like to the point where I actually wasn't able to draw, because I overworked my drawing hand, um, from taking on like way too many commissions, while going to grad school, I think, was like a wake up call that, y'all, like I could barely move like my my hand just to kind of grasp like my pencil. And even then, like I was experiencing like a lot of like, just like pain. I wasn't sure if that was like, arthritis or anything like that, but as soon as I told myself like, okay, I really do need to just rest and take a break. And I was really happy that I was working with, a client that was also a cartoonist and who experienced the same thing. They just said, yo, like you don't need to explain any further. Beyond that, I understand I went through the same thing and I wasn't able to draw for weeks. And even now, I tend to still guilt trip myself for not being productive or not being a part of this culture of immediacy, for most of last year, because I just drove or just channeled all of my energy into teaching, 2 online classes and just getting some comics done like in between, work with, my working with my students and doing freelance. But anytime that I just felt like tired and I just like don't want to hold a pen or a pencil, like I feel like I'm starting to come into a place where, like this feels so good, like not feeling that urgency to draw or to write is like so awesome. And even for my brain too, just to like not even be like in a creative mode, like forcing an idea like is really valuable. And I also want to speak to Ezra about what you just pointed out, how like draftsmanship is just like it's such a lie. It's not real, like the need to be like this master at drawing, I don't know, cars, horses, like all of these things that I never want to draw. But whenever I see like, I don't know, art that just doesn't feel so clean and so, I don't know, like I guess pristine. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I just love those types of comics that just feel so free and use like a minimal amount of like lines to make me cry. Like you just managed to like make me feel something, and that's comics. That's what's beautiful about the medium. Like there are so many styles out there that, you know, are very detailed and are very like, beautiful and immaculate, but the comics that I love to consume the most are the ones that just look the sketchiest. And I guess that kind of speaks to why I also love thumbnailing too. Like there's just something, um, there's just some like kinetic energy that's being exchanged between like your brain and like the cartoon character that you're drawing. Like you're still exerting all of this, all of these emotions into a character, and you're able to make me again burst into tears or just like maybe me cackle hella loud and like scare like people around me. Like something, some magic is still being manifested through you.
Yeah, and I would also add that there's like lots of different ways to create visuals for comics. Like it doesn't have to be drawings. That like there's lots of different techniques that you can approach that might be more accessible or less painful, like collage or photography, or even I think like in indie comics, there's also a lot of pressure put on people to kind of like do everything themselves, like write, draw, publish, do everything, and like, and not everybody is capable of doing everything themselves. And I think like it would benefit us all if we put less pressure on us all to be like the jack of every single trade when we do these things. And I think comics would be, I mean, mainstream comics does this to a degree, but mainstream comics aren't what I'm interested in. But I feel like that would also benefit us in the indie comic side too, because like there are a lot of really great indie cartoonists who maybe aren't the best storytellers, and they might be able to make better work if they teamed with someone who was like a better storyteller, maybe not such a good artist. I think there's like some lessons that we can take from mainstream comics in terms of like diversifying our workloads. I think it might help not only the content, but also our mental health in some ways.
Yeah, I feel like it was so many of like the theme around so many of these answers is just like caring for yourself and like being kind to yourself. That I would actually, I was gonna like shift us a little bit to like the hustle of like marketing and stuff like that, but I actually like want to not do that. And I have our final question is actually from somebody who asked to ask their question themselves. So I'm going to add Mickey to the spotlight and ask to unmute. I can also ask the question for you if you don't want to ask the question yourself. That's totally fine. But you want me to ask? Okay. So Mickey's question is there an ideal format or size to draw a comic in so it can be used for a zine style self-publishing and for a digital upload as well without having to like redraw or like reformat the text?
I feel like I have a real specific question or a real specific answer for that question. So maybe I'll jump in first. I think, well, first of all, the answer is no, not necessarily, but I think there are different tactics that you can use and different tactics that I've adopted myself to do comics, because I like with Upgrade Soul and Bottom Feeders, I wasn't sure if they were going to be web comics or print comics. So the thing I did with Upgrade Soul was, and Bottom Feeders, was that we designed the pages first and foremost to fit on a screen ratio, like an iPad screen ratio, like standard 4:3 screen ratio. And then for the print book, we stacked 2 iPad screen ratios on top of each other. So like if you look at the Upgrade Soul book, Upgrade Soul, every single page is basically 2 iPad screens stacked on top of each other. And we did that intentionally because we wanted it to be able to work natively on a screen or in a comic. And the only concession we had to make was that every single page of a standard comic book size ratio had to be cut, like bisected down the middle horizontally. So it just gave us way more freedom. With Bottom Feeders, I asked Ben Passmore, who drew Bottom Feeders, to do the same thing because we weren't sure what we were going to do with it. And then when we finished it, we pitched it around, and Fantagraphics ended up wanting to publish it, and we gave them the option. We were like, we could do this as a standard graphic novel size thing, or we could do it as half pages, so it's like more of an iPad screen ratio. And we all decided that we wanted to actually publish it in the iPad screen ratio size. But then recently, the book was translated to Spanish by a Spanish language publisher, and they ended up going with the 2 stacked ways. So that worked out for me with both Bottom Feeders and Upgrade Soul. I think something that you're seeing a lot now is people doing comics natively for Instagram. So they're doing comics specifically with square panels. And I think those square panels also work really well to just like, if you can think ahead to like how many panels are going to fit on each page and what your page breaks are going to be, like your page turns are going to be, then it can work out. It can get a little complicated mathematically if you're doing stuff like that. So I did this, I actually have a copy right here. I did this book called Are You at Risk for Empathy Myopia, which is originally done for the web, and I did a print version. And on this one, this is like a very small, like 4:6 book, and I just did 1 panel per page. So each page is like 1 Instagram post basically, but it's just like a super small thing. So I think like I said, the answer, there's not like no one way to do it, but I think there are ways you can be intentional and build versatility into your panel layout, just so you have the option to go in multiple different directions.
Yeah, I think my answer was going to be similar in the sense of like the square. I think I agree. A lot of people are doing like the Instagram stuff, but even when I've done stuff for like the Nib, and a lot of the times they'll like, or I've done a lot of digital pieces for them, which they do ask to be like square for like web. But then when I've done print stuff, there's still like, I mean, there's still some adjusting you have to make, but as long as you keep like similar ratio panels, like if it's a square, fine. Even if I think with the Nib, sometimes I would do like, let's say in one page I had four squares, and then one top like long runner. Once like if you do decide to do it in different mediums like web and print, like Ezra was saying, you can kind of stack them in a way that if you have like this sort of standard unit, it's easier to just edit it. But yeah, other than that, I can't think of any like one specific format that would be the best, I guess, for digitizing or printing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, go ahead, Breena.
Oh no, I was just gonna say like everything y'all said just sound like amazing to me. I have nothing else to add.
Well, I was just gonna say really quickly, like one thing that will help is if you don't try to do like really ambitious things with your panel structures. Like, you know what I mean? Like if every one of your panels is like shaped like a piece of broken glass and they all fit together like a perfect little puzzle on each page, then there's going to be no versatility in how you can adapt that page to fit a different medium. So the more like structured, like Mike was saying, like if you work on like a basic like 9-panel grid for every page and you don't deviate from that, then you're already building in some versatility into your art. But if you're doing, like I said, like every other page is a splash page and some pages have circle panels and some pages have like no panels, like it's going to make it really difficult to adapt that to other mediums. And I think also like the page size matters a little bit too. Like if you're drawing your pages with the intent to have your book published at like a 12 by 24 like Kramer's ergot style like comic, then like there's no way you're ever going to be able to reduce that to a screen, because it's just like I just did a comic for Ron Wimberly's Lab magazine, and like it was like, I don't know, it was like 24 by 32. It was like ridiculous. I'm like, I'm never going to be able to show this to anybody else. And I think Ron built that into the thing because he wanted like exclusive rights to every comic everybody did. And I'm just like, nobody's ever going to see this unless they buy this magazine. So I think like working smaller also, just like natively, and doing books like maybe not this small, but like I think for my next book, I'm looking at doing something that's like 4.5 by 7. So it's just like a pulp paperback size. And I think by making the pages that small, then it'll be really easy for them to translate to a phone. Like you could read the book on like a standard cell phone.
Cool. Well, that seems like a great place to end the conversation. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I am pasting in the links to our panelists' websites, as well as some stuff for Radiator Comics Studio. First of all, I want to thank everyone who submitted questions and to everyone who joined us today. And thank you especially to Ezra, Breena, and Mike for your thoughtful insights today. They're really fantastic. We will be announcing more programming soon. I did want to mention just 2 things that are coming up. We have these social events that we do. So next Saturday, the 21st, at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, we're having our social event, Cartoonist Coffee. We do this a couple times a month. They're like small group casual conversations for cartoonists to chat with each other. And that's, any experience level is welcome for those. And then also every Friday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern, we host Open Studio, which is a quiet work time for people to work on their comics in the presence of others. They're like 20-minute work sessions with 10-minute breaks in between for socializing and leg stretching. So both of those opportunities are good like social events if you're interested in meeting new cartoonists or getting to know some folks that you already know. You can find information for Radiator Comics Studio at radiatorcomics.com/studio. I totally meant to ask before we got started if Breena, Mike, or Ezra, if any of you have anything that you would like to plug that's coming up.
Not right now, I guess.
Okay. No? Okay. Well,
yeah. Sorry. No, I mean, just if you go to my website and you want to buy some comics or shirts and stuff, you can do that. But other than that, I'm just a person.
Yes. Please do support these fantastic cartoonists. So thank you so much again to Breena, to Mike, to Ezra for today's events, and to all of you for joining us. Everybody have a safe and joyful week. Thanks, everybody.
That was awesome. Thanks for having us. Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you.
Bye.
Bye.